Welcome back. Today we will be looking to replace a crankshaft seal, also known as a harmonic balancer seal. Why is it called a harmonic balancer seal? Well, this guy right here that you see is the harmonic balancer. So it's directly attached to the crankshaft. It is what propels the serpentine belt to allow all the different things to do what they do. Water pump, alternator, AC compressor, idler pulley, all that good stuff. So pretty important part. And behind that, going into the actual engine block, is a very small O-ring seal. And we're going to be replacing that. I've done this job a number of times, and I've always done it just by reaching straight down into where you see here with my jaw pullers and all the other pieces of equipment. And it's not the easiest thing to do. There's really not a lot of room here between the fan and the pulley, so it requires some maneuvering. What I'm going to do today, so this is going to be an experiment, could end up being a total failure and a waste of time, but I'm going to film it anyway in case it is helpful. I am going to get rid of the entire fan shroud here, and that will give me a significant amount of room to work with between the radiator and the harmonic balancer, just to see if I can get a little bit of extra room to work with the right tools. The most important part, which is also the most frustrating, is when you put the seal in, you have to reseat it, and you can either use the unbelievably expensive Miller tool that's like $500 for a piece of plastic, or you can use my method, which you'll see here shortly. The reason why we're replacing this, it's kind of hard to see from this angle, but there is a massive oil leak in this motor, and we will come down here. As I always say, ignore the angry eyes grill. This is not my Jeep. But if you look under here, lots of oil, and you can see specifically, well, if there wasn't a shadow there, a lot of it is coming from behind that harmonic balancer. You can also see that it's flung up all over the filter on the side. And basically what's happened is when driving, it blows that oil back right along the oil pan. So if you look at this and you just see all the oil in the oil pan, you might think it's an oil pan gasket leak. You can see that that's been replaced before. You see the blue gasket here instead of the factory black one. So this has been replaced. We know it's not coming from there because the oil is above it. And oil doesn't go uphill, it only goes downhill. But it does get blown backwards as you're driving and the wind is blowing underneath the vehicle. You'll also see that it's all over the control arm, all over the axle. It's a mess. And it's kind of hard to see from here because it's kind of spread out. You'll see that there's drips all the way back, basically past the skid plate for the transmission. And then what's more disturbing is when you start the vehicle, this will burp about 2 ounces of oil straight out of there and just put a puddle right on the floor. So we'll be replacing this. This is pretty common. Happens a lot in the 3.8 motors. Depending on the age of your motor, you may have to do this more than once, depending on the lifetime. Also, if you're replacing the seal and it's never been done before, you may also want to replace the actual harmonic balancer. They're not terribly expensive, but you might notice that there's a bunch of rubber on the side of here. This is part of the harmonic part of the balancer. It's basically designed to reduce vibrations coming from the crankshaft because that's not usually perfectly balanced. And with the firing of 6 cylinders, it wobbles, right? Maybe even microscopically, but those vibrations, if they make their way all throughout the vehicle, don't do it wonders. So the balancer is there to help dampen those vibrations. You might notice giant pieces of rubber chipped off of yours. This one's got maybe 60,000 miles on it. I didn't replace the seal when I replaced the balancer, so shame on me. But you can pick one of those up and replace this at the same time that you're replacing the seal. There's also this captive bolt that you see here. I would also recommend replacing that and not reusing the factory one. So we'll walk through all of that here shortly. The first thing that we're going to do, though, is get rid of this radiator fan shroud. First step in getting the fan shroud off is to remove the coolant bottle. Pretty easy to do. There is a clip here for the hose. You can use, a dedicated clip tool, or you can just grab it with a pair of pliers like this, preferably a little closer. Pull that up. Hose comes off. You just get that out of your way. And the coolant bottle is pretty easy. It basically snaps right in to this frame thing here. You can see on the back, there are two of these. One here, one at the top, and they basically snap in to two holes here on the back side and then slide down. Obviously, I'll need some coolant added to this too. Next step, the electrical connector right here. So on the back side is one of those standard push-in type of connectors you see all over these vehicles. So push this in, this whole part pulls away from the radiator or from the fan shroud. So this part here, the black part is part of the fan shroud, the gray is part of the connector. So literally just push and pull. Move that out of your way. If it'll stay out of your way. Next step is to remove the push pins that keep this shroud on here. There are 4 of them. I am missing 2. One there, one there. So there's one all the way down there by the radiator hose, one on that side of the sticker, one that should be here, and one here. You'll also see that the shroud gets tucked under where the bumper is mounted, or the grill is mounted. It's actually not held captive by any of those, so you don't need to do anything with those. If you look, it just comes right out. So after we get these off, then we just pull it straight out like that and take it off. Okay, now we are up underneath the Jeep. Front of the Jeep is to the right, so I'm actually facing the driver's side here, but it really doesn't matter. It should be okay. You should be able to figure it out, I guess. So there is a shroud underneath here as well, and there are more of the push pins. Only 3 of them on the bottom. And then this whole piece will pull off. It actually wraps around up here, sorry for the light, wraps around the sides a little bit, so you just kind of pull that down after you get those push pins out. Okay, after you remove those 3, we don't need to uninstall this shroud, we just need to kind of get it out of our way. The whole idea is this is the bottom of the fan assembly here. We want to be able to take it out without this, if we were connected to it, obviously wouldn't be a good idea. So just kind of move it out of the way, but I will warn you, you're going to get a bunch of stuff falling out of here depending on how old your Jeep is. Could be bugs, could be random organic matter, could be Jimmy Hoffa. I don't really know what could be under there. You can see mine, an array of leaves, trail mud, dead bugs. So again, if you're under here, cover your eyes, because there's bound to be stuff that's gonna come out of here. More is gonna come out when we get the shroud off as well, but you don't have to remove all the pins. There's actually 2 more up front that we don't need to take out. We would if we were gonna remove this entire thing. But again, just separating it from the shroud is all we're interested in. Back up top, we've got 2 bolts to remove. One, and not going to be good. One's right here on the outside of the shroud. One is over here on this side, kind of behind the air box. And it might be easier, depending on what kind of tools you have, to remove the air box, which is pretty easy, but the other bolt's right here. These are 8mm. Take those out, and then we'll be ready to pull this guy out. Okay, here's a better angle. I did move the air box, it literally lifts out of these rubber grommets. If you've never done this before, there is one hose on this side of the air box. You literally just pull that off. It's right here. Get that out of your way. You can just flip the air box around, and then you'll see the bolt I was talking about, 8mm, and then one on the other side. So hopefully that gives you a better perspective. Okay, just those 2 bolts. You'll see that it kind of fell forward a little bit. At the bottom, there are just 2 clips. You don't have to do anything with them. Basically, the fan shroud is just kind of sitting on them. So all that we need to do is lift. And the whole assembly comes out. Now we've given ourselves a little bit more room to work with down here in the engine bay when we're doing this work on the pulley. So without watching a YouTube video, that whole process should take you, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes, maybe less, depending on how good you are. Now we can get busy with the task at hand. First thing we're going to do is remove the serpentine belt so that we can get that pulley off. If you've never done this before, the first thing I would recommend is that you either take a picture or draw out how the serpentine belt flows, so when we go to reinstall it, you're not scratching your head, because it's not very intuitive. But good news is getting this thing off is really easy. So in the idler here, you'll see there's a little hole that is the right size for a 3/8 anything. All that you need to do is if you're using a ratchet, put it in the on mode so that you can turn it clockwise, and you'll see that as you turn it, it releases the tension on that belt. It's kind of hard to do with one hand when I'm filming, but basically you will just turn it until this piece goes down and stops, and then you can take your free hand, which I don't have, and just remove the belt. If you want to, you can just remove it from the harmonic balancer and leave it hanging. It'll probably be in your way. I would recommend just taking it off completely, and again, documenting what it looked like before you took it off. So I'm going to do that real quick, and we'll be back. All right, serpentine belt is off. First thing, well, not the first thing, the next thing we're going to do is remove the captive bolt here. This is a 15mm. If you don't have a impact wrench, or an impact gun, this will take some doing. As you turn this, you're actually turning the crankshaft, and it'll give a little bit, and then you get to a point where it's good for a second. You'll get a little bit of turn on it, and then it'll get to the point where you turn it, and the whole thing will turn. So this is where, again, impact gun will help. Only for taking it off. We are not going to use an impact gun for getting it back on, but I'll show you a trick for getting it back on later so we can actually get some torque on this thing without turning the whole crankcase. So here we go. Again, 15mm. This is also why I don't recommend you reuse these. So I can't remember the special name for this, But basically, the bolt gets bigger at this end, if you see that. And you'll also see that it's stripped out a little bit. It's because I replaced this harmonic balancer once before, but didn't replace the seal. If you try and reuse this, odds are it's going to snap on you. And if you snap this off inside the crankshaft, yeah, that's not good. So that's a whole nother video there. So again, I would recommend getting a new one for multiple reasons, the least of which is not stripping this out and not snapping it off when you put it back in. There's also this retaining thing here. Keep that. You can get these at your local dealer for like, I think it's like $6 a piece. So these aren't terribly expensive. A lot of bolts are ridiculously expensive. This one's not so much. So next thing we'll be doing is getting a puller on this guy to actually get it off the spindle. Okay, we are set up for the pull here. Word of advice, you're probably going to want to use your smallest gear puller set. And the reason why I say this is, well, first of all, it has to be a 3-pronged, can't be a 2. What you can't see, but you will when I get this off, there are 3, I'll call them spokes on here. And these particular pullers, you're going to want to get behind there and grip it in the middle. What I've found is that anything that can get around the outside is just too big for this space, and by the time you start cranking on it, you've run out of room, especially if you don't remove the radiator fan. We got lots of room here, which I love, so I think I'm going to do this next time I do one of these. It was worth the extra effort. Get this set up, and the way to do that, my advice would be to disconnect one of these and have the 2 still connected. You're going to have to kind of go under and grip, if that makes sense. So these are going to have to move a lot in order to kind of get around that lip on those spokes I'm talking about. The top one, or whichever one you leave loose, I would recommend the top, is there's just not going to be enough space in between the jack screw and this area to get it to bend where you need it to go. So what I would do is, if you have a puller like this one, disconnect this middle section here, get that in there, work it around, and then pull it back in, and then connect it with your screw here. And then go ahead and tighten this down. That way everybody is gripped around those 3 spokes I was talking about. And the space inside of those spokes is very small, which is also why I recommend you use whatever the smallest set of pullers, it sounded funny, that you have. Another piece of advice, if you've never worked with these before, lube up this jack screw a lot, because you're going to be working against the resistance of the threads inside of here and the resistance of the force of when this was put on. So just make sure that you lube this up really good so you've got that much less resistance. You can use an impact wrench on these. I like to just use a ratchet and go slow and steady. That way if something comes loose or breaks or whatever, it doesn't just kind of destroy all this stuff. I would also wear safety glasses. If you've watched any of my videos, I'm a safety guy. If one of these things breaks or a nut pops off or something, you get one of those in the eyeball, it's going to make working on cars a little difficult if you're a Cyclops, so or worse. So I would also recommend safety glasses, because you never know, one of these might break, if they're cheap steel, which these are actually. Jack screw is drop forged, and so is the middle part here. But that's it. Set your ratchet or your impact wrench or whatever in the on position, because you're going to be driving that jack screw this way. Another super important piece, make sure you use the right jack screw for the size. What you don't want is for that jack screw to be going into the crankshaft and ruining all the threads in there for the actual captive bolt that's going to hold this on. So if you've got something to put in there that'll stop the jack screw from going in, or again, if you have the appropriately sized jack screw, that will not happen. So the next thing is just to crank on this until this guy comes loose. Victory. All right, so here you can see the back side. You can see what I was talking about the 3 spokes and how the puller jaws get behind there. You see those little indents. If they're in the middle, they would have gotten on there. I just kind of grabbed this, and you'll see the jack screw poking through there. On this side, you can kind of get an idea of what I meant by leaving that top one loose, right? Trying to get this off, even when it's loose now, is pretty difficult. So what we'll do is, just to show you what I mean. Oh, cool, got a bug in my video. Welcome to YouTube. So if you take this one off, and this one's loose, then you can go like that. So basically you're getting it down in there and then doing that. You can't get that much angle on it, but now that these two are loose, you should have enough play. And I say that, and now it's not going to do it. Oh, probably because the jack screw's working against me now here. Okay. Maybe. There we go. There's one. Last one. Come on, don't fail me. Kind of hard to do with one hand. There we go. All right. So anyway, that's the size of the one I was using, just to kind of put it in perspective. The size of these jaws is really the key to getting behind there. So like I said, if you have an old one of these, there's a lot of rubber on here, and you'll notice all the bits of rubber, you know, falling off, breaking, whatever. That means it's not balanced. So if you have this off, I would recommend getting a new one of these. Okay, and this is what we're after. You can see all the oil all over the front of the crankcase here. This little guy right on the edge is the seal that we're going to be replacing. Tiny little O-ring with a spring inside of it, and it is directional, so you'll see there's an inside and an outside, not a left or a right, because, you know, it's a circle. But this is what we're going to be replacing, and the easiest way to get this old one out is basically with a pick tool of some kind, if you have one. Maybe that's a little bit better of a view there, straight on with the light. A pick tool, and then just kind of work your way around the edges and pull it out. Just try and be careful not to scratch the edges of either the crankcase or the crankshaft there. It is rubber, so you should be able to just kind of poke a hole in it and then pull it out. So we'll do that here in a sec. All right, now I'm going to pull the old seal off of here. Again, I've just got just a pick tool like this, and because it's rubber, I'm just going to kind of grab it and pull it out. I'm doing a good job of breaking it. There we go. And you can see, don't think that was from me picking it, because I was picking mostly from the front. You can see where I gouged it right there. But on the back side, you can see that deformity right there where my finger is. That is likely our culprit. So you can see there's rings here. Actually, I'll show you the unmolested version so you can get an idea of what it's supposed to look like. Okay, so the replacement I'm using is a Mohle brand, M-A-H-L-E, sorry, 48061. This is what it looks like new. You can see the inside is round and not dented like the one you saw a second ago. This will face the front of the Jeep. You can see those rings there on the inside, and those are, you'll notice the way that they're angled at the front of the Jeep, it encourages oil to go back inside, I guess is maybe the best way to say it, as the crankshaft is rotating and it's spinning up against these guys are the ones I'm talking about here, right? It kind of weeps the oil off the inside and sends it back into the crankcase. On the back side, I mentioned there was a spring, kind of hard to see, but inside of this lip. So that also keeps this tight against the actual shaft there, so that even if there's a little bit of wear and whatnot, it'll continue to kind of draw it in. So if this thing is out of round at all, there's a leak. This is why it's important to press this in pretty much perfectly when we get to that step here in a minute. We're going to clean all this stuff up. You can see I cleaned up a lot of it already. It was pretty cruddy. We are going to clean up the inside of those surfaces there on the actual spindle for the crankshaft. And then we're going to press this on. This requires a special tool from Miller. It's literally like $500 for a piece of plastic that's about as big as this that you press on. I'm going to show you a much cheaper way to do it, but again, we got to be careful to do it properly. And that's where that room that we created from taking out the radiator fan is going to help. So let me get this cleaned up and we'll be back. Okay, now the fun part, we're going to press this new seal on. So first thing we want to do is lube it up a little bit. That'll make it easier to get over the nose of the spindle there. Now we're going to recreate our own Miller special tool for just a couple dollars. So the first thing I have is a deep well 27 millimeter socket. The reason why 27 millimeter, you will see that it fits perfectly on the face of this seal. The other reason why we're using deep well is because it needs to be able to get over this nose. And then we're going to make our own forcing jack screw here. This is a 100 millimeter long M10 1.5. M10 1.5 is the thread of what's inside of here. So that captive bolt that we're going to put on there to basically hold the harmonic balancer on, in addition to just the force of the friction when we press it onto the spindle here. So what we're going to do is get this all set up. I have a washer, an M10 nut. We're going to pass it through like so, through the back side like that. Then we're going to place this guy on here. And then get it set up gently, get the threads engaged on this M10. It doesn't have to be tight, it just has to be enough that the threads are actually engaged. So now that that's engaged, all we're going to do is turn this guy to gently push our socket against the seal and we're going to press it in nice and slow and carefully. And that's it. You want to press the seal until the face of the seal is even with the face of the engine cover. You don't want to smash it back in there. That's how they get deformed. So it needs to be level as much as possible with this machined face of the engine cover. Okay, and now we're done. Sorry, I didn't put me actually cranking this forcing screw on here. I was in the way of the camera anyway, but you'll see the final product here. So, new seal is in. You just want to double check and make sure that it's not goobered up, around the edges or anything, and that, again, it's flush with the case. You will feel when you're pressing this in, when it starts to get close, you'll feel the force. It'll be really easy to turn as you're pressing that seal in, but as soon as you get it mated, you're going to feel feedback. So just stop right there. Don't try and force it in any further. All right, seal's done. Next will be pressing the new harmonic balancer back on. All right, final step, getting the harmonic balancer back on. So right now I'll just have it sitting on there. There's a couple ways you can do this. You can invest in a harmonic balancer installation kit, right? If you can find one that's decent, on even Amazon, maybe 60, 80, $100. Again, if you buy the special one from Mopar, you're looking at a few hundred minimum. So I am, and I guess the trick is you've got to find one with the M10 1.5. So a bunch of kits out there are made for Ford and GM. They're close, but they will strip out the threads inside of here if you try and use them. So you've got to have an M10 1.5. I have one, but I'm also going to show you if you've got a Ford or a GM kit, you need one piece out of that, and then reusing our homemade jack screw that I showed you earlier, you can make your own harmonic balancer inserter installer. So the first thing you're going to need is the captive washer that came off of this. Reason why you need that is because most of the other pieces I'm going to show you are so big that the M10 will just fall right through it. The other thing you're going to need is what's called a thrust bearing. So this comes out of pretty much any pulley installer kit. Again, doesn't need to be specific. What you'll notice is the hole is gigantic because typically those jack screws are pretty big. They're like M15 or something like that. So this thing allows you to, it's got bearings in here. It allows you to turn against the force of this without too much additional pressure, I guess is the best way to say it. So washer first, it goes on the back side of this. So you'll see there's two sides and they spin, but this will space it out so that it actually has something to rest against. Otherwise, this little piece in here is kind of recessed and you won't actually get what you're looking for. So these two pieces from any kit are what you need. They go on first. Then this assembly here. Do exactly like last time. Get this thing threaded. A little bit of engagement is good, but here's what you don't want to do. You don't want to turn the black bolt because this is going to take a lot of pressure to get on. And if you're using the black bolt, what you're basically doing is grinding against all the threads inside of the crankshaft, and you don't want that. That's a great way to strip that out or do some serious damage. So what you want to do is have two wrenches, one to hold the black still and the other one to turn the nut against that thrust bearing. So keep this one still after it's engaged. So what you're doing is pulling against the crankshaft, and that static force is a lot better than the dynamic force of you turning against those threads. Start off kind of easy, and you'll see that this harmonic balancer will self-level. Obviously, try and put it on as level as you can, but it's not going to go on very far. It takes a lot of force to get it the rest of the way on. So once you get it started, you'll see it'll even itself out, and then just slowly turn that as you press this on. All right, slow and steady wins the race. I'll also say that if you're going to do this do-it-yourself way, the other thing I neglected to say was that this black screw that I'm using as my jack screw needs to be something really hard, like carbon steel. You can't just use a typical zinc M10 because it just doesn't have the force that it needs to do what we need it to do. So another important little tidbit there. Almost there, just a little bit further to go and we are done. All right, that's got it right there. What you'll feel when the back side of this is seated against the part of the spindle that it's supposed to, when you try and turn this, you're gonna have a bunch of force coming at you on your jack screw. When you feel that, do not try and go any further. Go ahead and flip this around, loosen that little bolt a little bit, and should be able to get this out by hand. That means you did it right. And you'll notice the threads of the jack screw are not completely munged up. If we had actually used the jack screw to put this in, it would be terrible. That's what that looks like. Next thing we will do is put on the bolt that basically, I think it's called the captive bolt, the one that basically holds this on. It's the last measure of safety in case for some reason the friction of this doesn't hold it on there. We'll put that in, and that will tighten to 40 foot-pounds of torque. All right, so like I said in the beginning of the video, I would highly recommend not reusing the bolt that goes there. I still can't remember the name of it. It basically stretches when you give it enough torque, so reusing it isn't a great idea. Plus, if you snap it off inside of here, it's a bad day. So the one from Mopar, again, it's a couple bucks, reasonable for a Mopar part actually, and it comes with the thread locker already on it, which is nice. This is a 16 millimeter sized head, and if you're interested in the part number, 0650-2976 is the part. So this is the washer that came off. Really doesn't matter which way you put it on. And you should be able to get a lot of it by hand. And what you can't, we'll do the old-fashioned way. And once I get closer, we will use the torque wrench. Again, factory spec is 40 foot-pounds. But we got a little bit to go before we are going to get there. So about right there, you'll feel it's snug. Now I'll get the torque wrench on it. Almost there. And now we're spinning the crankshaft. Hopefully we'll get to the point where one of these cylinders locks up a little bit. That's all we need. Ah, come on. All right, well, this is where you might run into a problem, because 40 foot-pounds is enough to turn the whole crankshaft. Bingo, got it. Yay! If for some reason you get into a situation where you literally just can't give it any more torque without spinning the crankshaft, because there's these holes here, the ones that we grabbed onto with the pulley, I've in the past taken a screwdriver and just held it in there against the front of the crankcase, and then use that to give it the last few, foot-pounds or so of torque that you need. So we're good, 40 foot-pounds. Next thing we'll do is get this serpentine belt back on here. Okay, last piece is the serpentine belt. I zoomed out a little bit so you can see how it's routed, just in case you didn't take a picture in the beginning. So first of all, around the alternator, you'll also notice there's smooth sides and then sides with splines. So obviously the sides with splines, get the side of the belt with the splines. It makes it at least a little bit easier to figure out what you're doing. But around the alternator, then around the AC compressor here, under, over this pulley in the middle, down around the harmonic balancer. It will go over this idler pulley here. So when we put our wrench on here and push this down is when I'll get this last bit on here. This is your water pump, and then another little pulley here. So that's the routing, and literally all we'll do is pull that down. Actually, we won't, because my wrench is on the wrong side. Pull that down. Get that last little bit. Another important thing is just to make sure on the ones that are splined that you get it seated in the middle. Feel around the edges, even the ones that you can't see. Make sure everything is centered and it's in the splines. And you let go and pull that out. And make sure we're good. All done. Last thing to do is get the fan shroud back in. So again, it's just the 2 bolts and then the push pins for the housing, the shroud up here at the top. Get the air box back in and fire this guy up. Okay, first is the fan itself. You remember it sits down. You'll see these clips here on the bottom. And you'll look down and you'll see right where those things sit. Not that hard to line it up. Then all we got to do is put these 2 bolts back in, one on each side. These are 8mm. And I'm sure there's a torque spec for these. I'm really good about that usually, but not this time. Just tighten them to taste. Next is the shroud. So remember, maybe get the catch out of the way. It slides underneath where the grill is. Just get it centered. And those will slide right in. Line up your push pins here. You should have 4. I only have 2 because of other work that's been done on this guy. And mine are old, so I'll probably choose some new ones. All right, while we're up here, go ahead and reattach the electrical connector. Up underneath, there's again 4 more of these push pins. If you remember how to do that, remember to keep all the crap out of your eyes when you're up underneath there. And then we'll put the air box back in. Get our washer bottle back in there as well. So this will be, I won't show you this on camera because I'll be right in the way, but take the air box, reconnect it to the throttle body there. There's just a clamp if you took it all the way off. I did for the video. If you just swung it out of the way, it'll be that much easier. There are some little grommets on the bottom of the air box. They literally fit into those. You probably won't have all this extra wiring. This is for some auxiliary lighting, but the basically just get it lined up and then smack it real good and you'll seat those down in there. 2 more things if you did take the air box out. Remember this hose here literally snaps in there. And if you got this all the way out, you also will have disconnected your air intake temp sensor. This guy. Oops. Nope. That's the throttle body. And I just broke that. Fantastic. This is your intake temp sensor. Slides back on. Push that red pin in there. Looks like I got another repair I gotta do on the throttle body. That's down there. Awesome. Last thing to do is get the washer fluid back in here. Remember that just slides into those clips. There's one here and one down there. Put it in, slide it down, and then reconnect this hose and get that clamp put back on. All right. Washer bottle. Actually, I keep saying washer bottle. It's the coolant bottle. Hopefully you know what I'm saying when you actually take this in and out. Slides right in there. Hose goes on. If you haven't messed up your Jeep too bad, you'll usually have a clip right here that hose goes in to make it nice and even. This Jeep does not have that. Last thing I'll do is get that clamp done. At this point, we are done. Obviously, the next thing to do is check the oil, especially if you had as massive an oil leak as we had on this one. And then I will be taking this to the do-it-yourself wash with a bottle of degreaser and a power washer and getting the underside, because the whole thing from that harmonic balancer all the way back past the transmission pan is disgusting and completely gunked up with oil and residue. So, hope this was helpful. Hope you learned something. Hope you didn't bust your throttle body connector like I did, but we're all good. Thanks for watching.